In a world where security should be paramount over everything else, the digital society in which we currently live has seen breaches of security that have threatened our personal and financial information. You can prevent all that with the Defense Enabling Assistance Framework, or DEAF protection. Keep your records private, your telephone conversations private, and any data that you may send through your cell phone. DEAF protection is the answer. Visit our website at defprotection.com. That's defprotection.com. In 1974, a heinous crime occurred that ignited the imagination of the public. A young, troubled man, spoiled by his parents, decided to take the ultimate revenge in making sure that they would not interfere with his lifestyle. The house located at 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville, New York, would forever go down in the annals of true crime as a case that revolved not only around the crime, but the mystery that occurred thereafter.
After this call, one of the most celebrated and bizarre murder cases in American history that occurred in this tiny New York State hamlet would make the national headlines. But after all the events surrounding this brutal slaying became public, the incident would become legendary within the annals of American crime and cause stirs within the paranormal community, and some suspected that the killer's motive stemmed from an otherworldly possession. Ronald DeFeo Sr., a native of Brooklyn, New York, worked diligently at his father-in-law's Buick dealership until the day came when money was no longer a problem. DeFeo decided that he would move his family from their humble residence within the city to a more spacious address at 112 Ocean Boulevard in Amityville, Long Island. The residence that they now called home had 2 stories plus an attic, several bedrooms, and a boathouse on the Amityville River. In the front yard stood a sign that said, high hopes. But all was not well within the DeFeo family at the time. DeFeo and his wife, Louise, could be heard having violent arguments as her husband exhibited what appeared to be an uncontrollable rage that proved difficult to quell. His children viewed their father as an overbearing and demanding presence in their young lives. The oldest child, Ronald DeFeo Jr., affectionately known as Butch, especially felt the wrath of his father. When Butch was younger, he resembled a rotund weeble and was bullied because of his weight. DeFeo Sr. would coach the boy into standing up for himself, but not at home, only with other bullies. The father would not tolerate disrespect or disobedience and expected Butch to hold an example for the other children. Butch soon grew into a thick young man that refused to be the brunt of his father's abuses. The two would get into shouting matches that would often become violent. These physical altercations required very little provocation. The elder DeFeo and Louise soon realized that their eldest son's aggressive behavior appeared abnormal and sought the help of a psychiatrist. When Butch went to see the psychiatrist, he merely adopted a passive-aggressive stance and entered into self-denial that he truly needed help. In the hopes that they could appease the man-child, the DeFeos purchased anything Butch wanted. At the age of 14, Ronald Sr. purchased a speedboat for his son. Even when Butch wanted cash from his parents, he asked for it, and when he didn't receive it, he simply took it. By the time Butch reached the age of 17, he began using heavy drugs, including but not limited to heroin and cocaine. His behavior became increasingly more violent, and the private school he attended expelled him because of this behavior. Butch's outbursts were not confined to his home life. While out hunting with a group of friends, Butch held a loaded rifle at someone within the hunting party. The young man had been a friend of Butch's for years, and all he could do was stare at Butch as the armed teenager just glared at his lifetime acquaintance. The young man quickly left. When the parties met up later that day, Butch asked the threatened young man why he left them in the woods. At the age of 18, Ronald Sr. gave Butch a job at his grandfather's Buick dealership. Butch rarely showed for work, did nothing while there, and nothing was really expected for him to do at the dealership. He still received an allowance at the end of the week from his father. Butch used the money to spend on his car, which his parents purchased for him, drugs, and alcohol. His behavior became increasingly volatile, and the arguing with his father became more physical. One night in the new house, Butch heard his mother and father arguing loudly downstairs. Butch grabbed a 12-gauge shotgun, loaded one shell, and headed downstairs in a rage. When he arrived in the room where the argument took place, he pointed the shotgun directly at his father's face and stated, "Leave that woman alone. I'm going to kill you, you fat f***. This is it." Butch pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. When Butch walked out of the room, Ronald Sr. stood there in terror as his son meant to brutally murder him in cold blood, despite all the money and material goods he'd given him in the hopes to make the eldest son happy. What happened that night proved to foreshadow the violence to come. One incident in particular caused the worst blow-up between the two. A staff member at the Buick dealership requested that Butch bring some deposits to the bank, $1,800 in cash and $20,000 in checks. Butch devised a plan to say that he was robbed on the way to the bank and split the money with a friend. Having been away at the bank for 2 hours, Butch returned with his accomplice and gave his story to his father, who promptly became enraged and chastised the staff member that sent his son to the bank in the first place. When the police showed up, Butch took on an attitude of superiority and failed to furnish any further details about the so-called robbery, and also failed to provide law enforcement with a description of the alleged bandit. Over the course of the next few days, Ronald Sr. figured out why his son was uncooperative with the police. Still, Ronald Sr. encouraged the police to question his son further, and when they appeared again with some mugshots, Butch provided no further assistance to the police. When Ronald Sr. argued with his son in his office, he stated to his son, "You've got the devil on your back," to which Butch responded, "You fat I'll kill you." Butch then went out to his car and sped off down the highway. The most recent conflict did not come to blows as in other fights before, but the atmosphere surrounding the father and son turned increasingly dark. People sensed something tragic or unfortunate would happen as the two men continued their feud, but no one suspected the events yet to transpire. In the early morning hours of November 14, 1974, In the small hamlet of Amityville, New York, the air stood thick and ominous as people slept. At 112 Ocean Boulevard, the whole family went to sleep. Well, except for one. Butch DeFeo sat alone in his darkened room, brooding and cogitating his next steps. Butch felt that his family stood in the way of his devilish schemes, and he thought about the sheer hatred he had for his father. He believed his family a nuisance. Butch finally got up from his bed and went to the closet where he stored the weapons that he purchased and sometimes sold. He chose a .35 caliber Marlin rifle, which stayed loaded in the closet, and proceeded to his parents' bedroom, careful not to wake anyone. Butch went to the door of his parents' room and quietly pushed it open. He stood there for a while and just watched them sleep. Butch raised the rifle and fired. The first shot hit Ronald Sr. into the back, tearing through his kidney and exiting the elder DeFeo's chest. Butch fired another round into his father's back that struck him in the spine and lodged in his neck. Butch then pointed the rifle at his mother and fired 2 shots. The first shot collapsing her lung and the other shot acting as a coup de grace. Both parents now lay dead in their bed. Butch then entered the bedroom of his 2 younger brothers, John and Mark. As he entered the bedroom, the rifleman stood between the 2 singled beds of the 2 boys. Butch fired shots into his 2 sleeping brothers. John's spinal cord had been severed through his older brother's brutal attack, and his body just twitched for a few seconds before finally lying still. Mark was killed instantly. The fired rounds tore through his internal organs. To the amazement of later investigators, the shots failed to awaken anyone. Next, Butch headed toward the bedroom of his 2 sisters. The assailant entered the room, and his sister Allison awoke. Butch fired 1 shot into her face, killing her instantly. Dawn failed to awake, and Butch shot her in the back of the head, blowing off the left side of her face. At 3:15 a.m., the DeFeo family members lay dead in their beds. The family dog, Shaggy, was tied up in the boathouse and barked feverishly as a result of the gunshots he heard just moments earlier. Butch then cleaned himself and tried to establish some sort of alibi that would confuse the police. He showered, trimmed his beard, dressing in jeans and his work boots. He gathered the bloody clothes and the rifle, wrapped them in a pillowcase, and then got into his car. He threw the full pillowcase into the back seat and took off toward Brooklyn slightly before dawn. He stopped at a corner and discarded the pillowcase and the bloody clothes and the rifle into a storm drain. Butch then returned to Long Island and then went to work at the Buick dealership at 6 a.m. like nothing happened. Later that day, Butch called the Amityville residence to see where his father may have been, again trying to establish an alibi, and then left work early and attempted to visit his girlfriend, whom he told he was getting off work early. He stopped by his girlfriend's apartment, and when he mentioned that he passed by the house, all the cars were in the driveway, but no one answered the door. He called the house to demonstrate to his girlfriend about what he had told her, almost as if he were reinforcing his alleged alibi. When the younger DeFeo made his way back into Amityville, he ran into a friend, Bobby Kelski, and the 2 stopped to have a conversation. Butch spent the rest of the day drinking and taking heroin. He went to a bar called Henry's and then faked any worry that he could not reach anyone at the DeFeo residence. His friend Kelski came into the bar a few short moments later. Butch stated that he would have to break a window to get in. A strange statement, as he lived there and probably had a means by which to unlock the door to gain entrance into the house. Unless, of course, he left the key at the house because he planned it all along. Kelski then added that Butch must do what he has to do to get into the house. DeFeo then left the bar and returned a few moments later, where he appeared agitated and dismayed. He turned to his friend and implored Bobby to help him. Butch stated, "Someone shot my mother and father." Soon, not only were Bobby and DeFeo headed to the house on Ocean Avenue, but a few more friends piled into one car and accompanied the 2 men. This occurred over 15 hours after the murders. When they arrived at the residence, Kelski ran up the stairs to the master bedroom and found Ronald Sr. and Louise DeFeo dead in their bed. He then ran downstairs and outside the house to find DeFeo, who stood outside in a grief-stricken state. Or so Kelski witnessed. Joey Yeswit went to the kitchen and called the police. Within a few short minutes, Officer Kenneth Gaguski arrived and found a large group of men outside the residence. "My mother and father are dead," he stated to the officer. When Officer Gaguski entered the residence, he went upstairs and found the married DeFeos dead in their bed. The officer then went downstairs to use the phone and dialed his headquarters to report what he had seen so far. Butch sat at the kitchen table as Officer Gaguski described the scene to his duty desk sergeant. DeFeo also stated that he had 2 sisters. The officer put the phone down and then ran back up the stairs. Another Amityville officer, Edwin Tyndall, arrived on the scene. Gaguski and Tyndall walked up the stairs to the girls' bedroom and found their dead bodies. At approximately 7 p.m., the neighborhood came alive with the news that the heavy crime associated with New York City at the time had visited their small community. Suffolk County Detective Gaspar Randazzo questioned Butch at length about what he knew about the incident in his residence. DeFeo made the assertion that perhaps the murders were a result of organized crime involvement and that he might still be a target. If that were the case, any further interrogations should be done at police headquarters. Later, at police headquarters, DeFeo gave a full statement. In his statement, of course, he vindicated himself from having any responsibility for the killings. After giving the statement, investigators continued to question Butch. He pointed the finger for the murders at a gentleman named Louis Fellini. Fellini lived with the DeFeos for a time and assisted with Ronald Sr. and Jr. to dig out a space where the elder DeFeo could hide precious gems and other valuables. Butch readily confessed to being a heroin user, and the fact that he set one of his father's boats on fire for collection of the insurance money rather than paying for the new motor that Butch had damaged in the first place. Because of his cooperation, the authorities had no real reason to believe that he was responsible for the murders. As the investigation continued, Butch slept on a cot in one of the secluded filing rooms of police headquarters. As investigators made a last sweep of the DeFeo residence, one detective in particular decided to cover over Butch's room, as it was never searched throughout the whole investigation up to this point. At approximately 2:30 a.m. on the morning of November 15, 1974, Detective John Shervill searched Butch's room and found 2 rectangular boxes with markings. One had .22 rifle and the other .35 caliber rifle. Detective Shervill took the boxes with him back to the station, even though at the time he gathered that evidence, he was not aware of the murder weapon. When Shervill arrived at the station, he learned that the murder weapon was a .35 Marlin rifle. Also at the time, Kelsky gave a statement to police and mentioned that Butch was a gun enthusiast. At this time, the detectives seriously considered Butch a suspect in the murders of his family. At 8:45 a.m. on November 15th, Detective George Harrison awoke Butch from his slumber. "Did you catch Fellini yet?" Butch asked. Instead of answering, Detective Harrison read Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. his rights. Butch protested and stated that he tried to communicate all he knew. He even waived his right to counsel so that he could help them further. Butch portrayed the witness with nothing to hide with an impeccable performance. Exhausted, officers left the station when 2 more detectives took over the interrogation. Lieutenant Robert Dunn pressed Butch on his alibi and his recollection of the time when he stayed in his bedroom. After coaxing the suspect further, they were able to establish that the crime occurred between 2 and 4 a.m. At this point, Butch's rendition of events started to fall apart. What he didn't know was when the time of the event had been established, the physical evidence did not match the young man's story, and Butch had become linked to the crime scenes. When the detectives mentioned that they knew the .35 Marlin had been used in the murders, Butch stammered and continued to lie. After a few minutes of pressing, Detective Dunn got Butch to confess to the murders.
"It all started so fast. Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast."
Authorities charged Butch DeFeo with 6 counts of murder. From the outset, it appeared that because of his drug use and earlier therapy, that the defense may mount an insanity foundation. Butch DeFeo's case came to trial on October 14, 1975, almost a whole year since the murders. The prosecuting attorney, Gerald Sullivan, made his opening statement to the jury that their lives would be changed in viewing the evidence of this case, and despite the defendant's objections and assertions, Butch DeFeo murdered his family.
If you will keep your minds open, carefully evaluate and assess all the proofs, I'm confident that at the end of the case, you will come back into this courtroom and find Ronald DeFeo Jr. guilty of 6 counts of murder in the 2nd degree.
Sullivan never advocated that Butch DeFeo was mentally unstable. He actually stated that the defendant planned and executed the murder of his family as a seething psychopath, plain and simple, and that his confession proved accurate along with physical evidence obtained from the crime scene. Even though there were some psychiatrists who testified at the trial as to the condition of Butch's mental state, on November 21st, 1975, the jury unanimously found Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. guilty of 6 counts of murder. 2 weeks later, the court sentenced DeFeo to 25 years to life in prison on all 6 counts and remains incarcerated to this day. On December 18, 1975, a family of 4, George and Kathy Lutz, and 2 children from Kathy's previous marriage, moved into the old DeFeo residence at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. 28 days later, the Lutz family fled the residence, claiming that supernatural forces made their stay there unbearable. Flying pigs with red eyes, rooms filled with flies, mysterious voices in the night, George Lutz waking up every morning at 3 a.m., the time of the DeFeo's murders. George's strange behavior and the walls bleeding some black substance contributed to the Lutz's flight from the house. After the family fled, George Lutz contacted noted parapsychologist Dr. Stephen Kaplan to assemble a team of investigators to examine the house. When Lutz contacted Dr. Kaplan, the parapsychologist doubted the validity of Lutz's claims. After investigating, Dr. Kaplan deduced the incidents that Lutz described could not have happened, that simultaneously the number of demons and ghosts that would have to inhabit would be astronomical. The Lutz's story, though fantastic and makes for a good Hollywood horror movie, was later exposed as fraudulent by not only the Catholic Archdiocese of Rockville Center, but also the Amityville Police Department. Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s defense attorney, William Weber, U.S. District Court Judge Jack Weinstein, and even George and Kathy Lutz recanted large portions of their statements about the paranormal occurrences. What the Lutzes may have hoped for in seeing their new residence become a mecca for ghost hunters and demonologists fell flat, as onlookers merely passed by and didn't stop to enter the residence.
The Amityville murders certainly could have been a vehicle for skeptics to pronounce that ghosts do exist. However, as a publicity stunt, it scored largely on the ability to sell the idea, and taking such a tragic event, capitalizing on it merely by mentioning a supernatural element. Like the later Blair Witch Project, the publicity surrounding this alleged haunting brought millions to the producers, and proved that a gullible public would make those perpetuating a likely myth very wealthy. Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. still sits within the New York State Correctional System, having been married and divorced while behind bars. Kathy Lutz died on August 16, 2004 of emphysema, and George Lutz died on May 8, 2006 from heart disease. The couple had divorced in the 1980s, but remained friendly. Some of us who are not quite certain as to whether the Amityville horror was a true story were awakened by a photo that was taken in the late 1980s, early 1990s by a paranormal team investigating the Amityville house. In the photo, you'll see a young boy with glasses near the edge of the stairway. The investigator who took the picture stated that it was a timed photo taken on the 2nd floor, and at the time the photo was taken, no one else was on that floor. Until next time.